This is a picture of me 17 years ago, and these are some pictures of me now. You may notice there's something different. I get now, whereas before I was constantly friend-zoned and rejected. And the reason why is that I developed something called a masculine electromagnetic sexual energy field, also known in various occult and mystical traditions as a Buddha field, a rainbow body, an astral body, a diamond body, or the so-called body of light. If you were talking to a Buddhist monk in Tibet, he would tell you this field is an emanation of the rainbow body. If you were talking to a teenage girl on TikTok, she would simply tell you this is your aura. And she actually wouldn't be wrong. It's the same thing. Now, what she wouldn't tell you, but which the monk would, is that this aura is not something you're just born with. It's not something you just get automatically. It's something you have to actively develop. Specifically, this aura that makes you magnetic to women comes about as a result of developing your astral body, which again is not something everyone is just born with. The astral body is something you have to actively build yourself. Just like how no one is automatically jacked and muscular with six-pack abs, you have to go to the gym and follow a certain program to become that way. And when you have this astral body, when you've done the things I'm going to show you which develop it, it gives you an aura that makes you magnetic to women. It gives you what's known as animal magnetism. This means women literally just come to you in many cases. They approach you, they stare at you, they flirt with you shamelessly, they touch you, they compliment you, they look for excuses to spend time alone with you. Some say the astral body also allows you to project yourself outside your physical body, to go and do things in the world while your physical body is in bed at home, for example. I'm not going to talk much about things like that in this video. For the time being, I want to limit this discussion to things we know and can prove about the ordinary world as we know it, namely the effect that doing these practices has on your ability to attract women, which is generally going to be one of the first changes you notice anyway. And as a result of doing this work, I now attract women with ease. Despite the fact that I'm dorky, balding, ugly, with acne scars and a hooked nose, I can get beautiful girlfriends more or less on command. I regularly sleep with all my female friends, and I can get laid basically anytime I walk outside my house. So in this video, I'm going to show you how any guy can get these same results, no matter your looks or age, no matter your money. And this all comes down to your aura. It's got nothing to do with pickup lines or making more money or buying a sports car or having a six-pack. This video is going to talk about what actually triggers attraction in women on an organic level, which has absolutely zero to do with any of that utter crap I just mentioned. So pay close attention, because I can guarantee you if you can't attract the women you want, it's not because of your looks, it's not because of your money, it's not because of your height, it's because you do not have this aura that I'm talking about. You do not have a sufficient degree of animal magnetism to make women take an interest in you. That's it. That is what all sexual attraction comes down to. When you have an aura, when you have magnetism, women want to you. When you don't, they don't. Okay, so first off, what do we mean by aura exactly? Well, aura has been defined as a distinctive atmosphere surrounding a given place or person, an energy field that is held to emanate from a living being, or a luminous radiation. When you have aura, getting girls is easy. When you don't have aura, getting girls is really, really hard. And there's a lot of you who don't have an aura. You don't have any kind of animal magnetism at all. And so women ignore you. They don't even look at you. If you approach them, they run away. And this is not a problem you can solve at the level of anything else but your aura, your emanations as a man. You know, you can lift weights and make money to your heart's content. You can make yourself the most high value man you know. It's not going to give you aura. It's not going to give you that commanding presence that literally makes people spin their heads around to look at you when you walk in a room. And this is why all the current dating advice for men, all the so-called masculinity advice, is complete fucking garbage, because it's focused on the leaves and not on the roots. The current paradigm, both of science and of modern masculinity advice, does not understand aura. It doesn't understand that it's the most important thing for a man. And above all, it doesn't understand that aura is not a metaphor. It's an actual physical thing. It's as real as the nose on your face. When you have this aura, everything else can be taken away from you. You could be living in a tent on the side of the street. You will still be attractive to women. You will still command respect among men. You know, people think that your self is something that stops at the limits of your skin. It doesn't. Your self is actually something that extends out however far as your aura extends. Now, in most people, this is only a few inches. but in some cases, a man's aura can expand out for several yards or even for several miles. In approaching the study of this, science refers to the electromagnetic field which every human being has been proven to have and which emanates from the organ of the heart. What science has not yet discovered is that these fields men have can be of radically different sizes, different degrees of strength. Your electromagnetic field can be weak, meaning people won't feel it unless they're standing very close to you. But with special exercises, a man's electromagnetic field can be made to extend a great distance from his physical body. This is what the story of Jesus and the centurion is about. You know, the centurion had a servant at home who was very sick, and he asked Jesus to heal him. Now, normally Jesus healed people by laying his hands on him, as, you know, all faith healers usually do. But in this case, the Gospels say Jesus restored this sick man to full health instantly, despite being in a completely different place, possibly many miles away. Now, assuming this story is true, how is it possible, or how could it be possible? Well, it is possible because of the human energy field, the electromagnetic field, the radiations of a man who has a very high degree of being and of animal magnetism, which can extend a great distance from the physical body. And ultimately, it's actually this which we're talking about when we talk about a man's aura. Now, when it comes to seducing women, aura is everything. Aura is the cheat code for getting women, period. There's really nothing else you can do that is going to give you as dramatic of an effect as this. Most guys do not have an aura. The very rare man who does have one stands out instantly. And when you have this, women basically just throw themselves at you. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. They approach you, they smile at you, they flirt with you, and when you approach them, they're immediately friendly to you. But when you don't have an aura, you get the results that pretty much every guy now complains about online, i.e., women are mean to you, they're nasty to you for no apparent reason, they are hostile to you when you try to talk to them, and they reject your approach even if you didn't do anything wrong. Now, what I need you to understand is that this is fundamentally because of your aura. It's because of your emanations. You know, as Thomas Pynchon once said, women have antennas that men do not. In other words, women are sensitive to certain layers of reality, which as men, we are mostly completely blind to. Sort of like how dogs can hear very high frequencies of sound, which humans can't. Women can receive certain signals that as men, we don't really have the equipment to pick up on. One of these signals, one of these things is a man's aura, his emanations, his animal magnetism. Or again, what in Tibetan Buddhism is called the rainbow body. But of course, most guys are ignorant of this. They live on a completely surface level of reality, and therefore they assume when they're getting rejected, it must be because of how they look, or it must be because they're not wearing a nice enough watch or something. It's complete and utter bullshit. The actual reason you're getting rejected is because you don't have any animal magnetism, and women can see this. They can feel it right away. They can see it as clearly as if you had a big sign on your head saying, "I am nothing. I have no power." Now, the other thing is, animal magnetism, as well as being a field around your body, is also something that people can see in your eyes. It's conveyed through the eyes. It can even be projected through the eyes. And when you have animal magnetism, it gives you an almost supernatural power to control people through their eyes. This is what the old myths and folklore about the evil eye refers to. So that's also important to know before we go on with this. Animal magnetism, yes, it's a field around your body, but it's also a certain presence you have as a man, which is conveyed primarily through the eyes. It makes people instinctively want to submit to you and be compliant to your will, particularly when you look them directly in the eye. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to get that. I'm going to show you how I got it and how you can do the same. This is going to be a long video. This is going to be a masterpiece. If you are stupid, if you have a short attention span, then click away now. We're going to be covering a lot of ground here. I'm going to be condensing what really should be like a 500-page book into a tiny, tiny little capsule in this video. This is probably something you're going to need to rewatch several times. I recommend you bookmark this video so you can watch it again later. I would also recommend you find a site that lets you download this video to your hard drive in case YouTube or even if I myself ever take it down. Because this is more than anything else the video where I'm really going to give you the keys to the castle. This is a topic I've never spoken about before. It's a topic I'll probably never speak about again. Because to be quite frank with you, we're going to be getting into territory and ideas here that most men are simply not ready for. And upon contact with some of the things we're going to be talking about, a lot of men actually cannot take it. It breaks their minds. It makes them experience so much cognitive dissonance that they cannot process it. And there is one idea specifically that we're going to be getting into in relation to this. It's the idea that men are machines, which I'll be explaining in a lot more detail later on. This is an idea that if you hear it at the wrong time, or if you hear it without being properly prepared for it, it can actually make you go insane. And I mean that literally with no exaggeration. This is something that once you've heard it and once you've fully understood it, there is no going back. Because basically, once you know about some of the things I'm going to convey here, and once you've heard of these ideas, you have to take action to change certain things. And this has to be done within a certain definite period of time, or else things can go very, very badly for you. And so that's one of the reasons I've never spoken about this before and why I probably never will again, because some of the stuff we're going to be getting into here is literally an info hazard, meaning it's true information that can actually harm the person who learns it if they're not ready for it. So you need to decide before watching this whether having this kind of aura with women is something you really want and which you're serious about getting. If you're not serious about getting this, like I said, click away now.
But I warn you, if you say a single word to anyone about what you have seen, there will be the most dire consequences.
Okay, but let's go back and start from the beginning. Aura, animal magnetism. How do you get this? And how does it relate to this idea that men are machines, quote unquote? What does that even mean? How are these two ideas even related at all? Well, to begin to explain this, I first need to tell you a little bit about the man I learned this from. You know, normally in these videos, I try to get into the practical how-to information as fast as I can. In this case, with this topic, that's not going to be possible. There's a lot of ground we need to cover first in terms of the history and background of these ideas and where they came from, or to be more accurate, who they came from and the mystery of what this person represents. So, the person I first learned about aura and animal magnetism from was a man by the name of George Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was a mystic in the first half of the 20th century. He was a kind of Russian wizard, in some ways a bit like Rasputin, and this man was an extremely mysterious individual. Some say he was a con artist or a charlatan. Others accused him of being a black magician who used hypnosis to manipulate his followers. And Gurdjieff himself did nothing to discourage these rumors. He did not live like a saint, far from it. He was an unregenerate playboy and womanizer of the deepest dye. He fathered at least 7 children with 4 different women, in fact, probably far more than that. He enjoyed the finer things in life, lavish dinners, fine wines, good living, and he was, by all accounts, irresistible to women. He had immense charisma and magnetism, to a degree that many people considered to be virtually supernatural. He was a master hypnotist. He could put people into trances at will. He had what's sometimes called a reality distortion field. He could do anything and convince anyone of anything. You basically could not encounter this guy without it warping your reality. He could make people hallucinate at will, communicate with people telepathically, or at least make them believe he was doing so. One notorious story about Gurdjieff, to take just one example, he liked to host these big opulent dinners. In one case, he was sitting beside a young woman he didn't know. According to people who saw it, Gurdjieff said something to this woman. He did something to her. Maybe he put her into some kind of trance. But at any rate, what happened was that without even having laid a finger on her, he caused this woman to start having an orgasm right there at the dinner table in front of dozens of people. Now, what's interesting about Gurdjieff is that when people asked him how he did these things, he didn't try to keep it a secret. He explained everything he was doing to anyone who asked him about it. And what he said was the reason he had these kinds of powers was he had developed something he called animal magnetism, or Handbladzone was another word he used for this. And when I stumbled across this when I was 21 years old, it immediately fascinated me. I became convinced that there was some secret hidden in Gurdjieff's work for how to attain this kind of magnetism, and I became obsessed with figuring it out. At the time, I was very unhappy with my life, especially my romantic life or the complete lack thereof. Girls didn't like me, I couldn't get a girlfriend, I couldn't get laid, despite the fact that I was in college and everyone around me was getting laid. And long story short, I felt like my time was running out to get these things. I was wasting what little was left of my youth. But every time I tried to change my situation, I had failed. Every time I approached a girl, I got rejected or humiliated. Every time a girl seemed to like me, we'd go to texting and then eventually she'd lose interest and I'd never see her again. So because of these extremely sharp pains in my life, I became extremely motivated to get to the bottom of this whole question of animal magnetism. Why does certain guys just have it with women? And specifically, what was it that Gurdjieff was doing that he was able to have these crazy powers over women? And that were reported and corroborated by dozens of reliable, respectable people, including people who were hostile or skeptical of him. So when I read about this guy, like I said, I became very, very interested in him, and I became obsessed with figuring out what he was doing and how he was doing it. And like I said, Gurdjieff actually explained everything to whoever asked him. He said it wasn't supernatural. He said he was using hypnosis on people, but he said this was all based on something called animal magnetism, which he explained was a kind of substance in a man's body, a bit like hormones or pheromones. And if you can read between the lines, he actually explains exactly what you have to do to produce this substance in your body and thereby become magnetic to people and to be able to influence them the way that he did. Gurdjieff said anyone could do this. He showed in detail how to do it. He laid out a complete system, step by step, for exactly how to acquire these same powers as him. And what's fucking amazing to me is that no one cares. You see this guy in the early 20th century, well documented, who literally has more or less proven supernatural powers and abilities. He tells you what he's doing. He tells you how to do it. He says that any man can do this if they do these things and if they understand certain laws, and yet nobody cares. Nobody even tries. Virtually no one's even heard of Gurdjieff. They'd rather watch Marvel movies about superheroes than to become superheroes themselves. They'd rather jerk off to tens in porn than have sex with actual tens in real life. Now, I'm going to get into how to do all this in a second, but the thing you have to understand about Gurdjieff and about his system is it's not remotely like any other spiritual system you've ever seen or may have studied, because this is not about getting inner peace or becoming a more spiritual person, whatever the fuck that means. This is about measurable, verifiable results in life, in the real world. And in short, this is about power. Nietzsche wrote a lot about the will to power. He's very good on the theory of that. But Gurdjieff is the method. And unlike Nietzsche, Gurdjieff actually lived the will to power, and he was living proof of his own method. So what are those methods? How do you attain power in life? How do you become that dictator who people just instinctively want to obey? Well, it should be pretty obvious to anyone that mastery over others requires self-mastery. It requires, first and foremost, being master of yourself. And the absolute core of Gurdjieff's teaching is that we do not have this. We are not masters of ourselves, no matter how much we like to imagine or fantasize that we are. Okay, so we've said this system is fundamentally about power. It's about expanding your power to influence your environment rather than being influenced by it. And it's about developing something in yourself that is able to withstand the influences of your environment. Gurdjieff calls this a permanent and indivisible I. And his entire philosophy begins with the premise that we do not have this. We think we have it, we say we have it, we talk about I as if we have a permanent and unchanging I, but we don't. We don't have a single permanent I, we don't have a will. Instead, we have many different and often contradictory I's and contradictory wills. And it's because of this that we can't do anything. A simple example of this, which everyone's familiar with, is, you decide to do something, even something quite small, but you cannot carry it out. Like, I'm going to stop jerking off. I'm going to start eating healthy. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to start going to bed early. Now, the problem is, one I makes this decision and has this plan, but it's a completely different I that has to carry it out. And this other I does not want to do it. It has plans of its own. It has its own likes and dislikes, which may be totally different than those of the I who made the original decision. And this is why Gurdjieff says no one does anything. No one can do anything. Instead, everything simply happens. Not as we want it to happen, not as I would wish it to happen, but just however it happens. This is why you can't approach a girl. This is why you're fat. This is why you can't stop fapping to porn and Instagram models. This is why everything you're unsatisfied with in your life looks exactly the way it does. It's not that you don't know what to do. You know exactly what to do. Everyone does. The problem is you can't do it. And every time you try to make yourself do it, you fail. And Gurdjieff says this is universal among human beings. People are in what he describes as a state of sleep. They are walking around completely unconscious. And the chief feature of this unconsciousness is that they cannot do anything, although they fantasize and imagine that they can, or that at least someone else can. No one does anything. No one can do anything. Instead, everything just happens. And the best example of this, the one that every man on this earth knows and understands deep in his bones, is this whole question of approaching women. You know, every man has at some point in his life had the thought, you know what, I'm going to start approaching women. As if he can. As if he has a choice in the matter. As if he has any power at all to control himself in this way, which he doesn't. It's a complete fantasy. And the moment a man actually tries to make good on his promise to approach a woman, he will know this. He will feel it. He will come face to face with and feel his complete slavery, his complete helplessness to do anything, even something as relatively small and trivial as this seems to be on the face of it. Because it's one thing to make this plan about approaching women when you're sitting at home with your feet up, but then what happens the next day when you're out and about and you actually see that hot girl? Of course, you do absolutely nothing, and you can do nothing. No matter how hard you try, no matter how much you flagellate yourself, you cannot do anything, at least not anything that actually matters. And the reason for this is that, as Gurdjieff puts it, you are a machine, not a man. Men, as we find them in life, are really machines. Not metaphorically, but literally machines. Because a man, in the full and proper sense of that word, can do. A machine cannot do. All it can do is respond to external stimulus. And therefore, if you cannot do, you are not a man. You are a machine. An automaton, a kind of mechanical puppet or robot with no will, no I, no internal locus of agency or control, but which acts in a purely mechanical way in reaction to external forces and conditions. So this is the fundamental starting point of Gurdjieff's whole system. Men are machines. All men, without exception, are machines who act entirely in reaction to external influences and are unable to do anything. You are a machine. And the first task, the most important task, is to feel your own mechanicalness and to realize this fact for yourself. Not just intellectually, but to fully understand it with your whole mass, with your body, with your emotions, and with your mind. Now at this point, it seems like we've gotten very far from our original topic of talking about how to get the aura that is sexually attractive to women, how to get animal magnetism, how to build an astral body, and how to get the various powers and abilities that having such a body can give you. But in fact, we haven't. This whole time we've been talking about exactly that. Because this is one of the chief differences between a man, in Gurdjieff's terminology, and a machine. A man, in the full sense of the word, has certain properties, certain qualities that a machine does not have and can never have. One of these properties is animal magnetism. The other qualities a man has that a machine does not have are a permanent and unchanging I, will, the ability to do, the ability to proactively change and influence your environment instead of being changed or influenced by it, an astral body, a soul, and as a direct consequence of all of the above, the last thing a man has, which a machine definitely does not have, is immortality and the ability to go on living after the death of your physical body. A machine, someone who can't do, does not have this. After their physical body dies, they are permanently destroyed and nothing remains of them. But a man has the possibility of continuing to live for a certain time after the death of his physical body, perhaps even for a very long time. Now, it's important to understand that in normal life, we call ourselves men, and we think we have a right to call ourselves men. But when Gurdjieff uses this word, man, he's referring to something that is very far from where we are now and from what we are now. When Gurdjieff uses the word man, he's essentially referring to what a normal person might as well call a superman or a god or a minor deity. Because if you had actual will, if you actually had the ability to do, as opposed to just imagining you have this, then you would be superhuman from the perspective of ordinary people. But the whole point is that we do not have these things. And everything else hinges on understanding just this. Yet this is the one thing no one wants to understand. We do not have the ability to do. We cannot do anything. At least not anything of any consequence. With us, instead, everything just happens. And this is why we are not men. This is also why we don't have animal magnetism. Because animal magnetism is a property of a man, not a machine. And until you can do, you are a machine. Literally, by definition, as something that has no self-directed will and no internal locus of control. So, what I've just described is the theory of Gurdjieff's system. What we're going to get into now is the practice. Now, when people first hear of the idea that they are machines and not men, and this is the real cause of all their other problems, they naturally ask, well, how can this be changed? How can we stop being machines and become men? But the answer should be pretty obvious on its face. You can't. This is not something that can be changed. Because how could a machine change itself? To change anything presupposes that you have the ability to do. And the whole point is that we do not have this. If anything could be changed, you would already have changed it by now. Our position is in fact completely hopeless. And this needs to be understood at a very deep level. You cannot change anything. You do not have a choice to stop being a machine and become a man, any more than you have a choice to become a billionaire or a heavyweight champion boxer just because you decided to. To become a man in the full sense of the word with animal magnetism, a permanent I, will, the ability to do, that is a very, very distant and remote goal from where we are now. We cannot have any of these things now. All we can do, the only thing that can maybe give us any possible hope of one day being free and of having real power, is to struggle to become just a little bit less mechanical, a little bit more conscious. See, a machine that becomes conscious of itself as a machine is no longer a machine, or at least it's no longer quite the same kind of machine as it was before. And this brings us to Gurdjieff's first and most important practical technique, which is known as self-observation. Simply put, you need to closely watch and study your machine. You need to observe yourself at all times in all ways. Observe yourself as you go through life. Observe your movements. Observe the feelings and sensations in your body. Observe your emotional reactions to things. Observe your thoughts and the way they flow. That is what self-observation means. It is observation of our machine, studying our machine, and over time, beginning to know our machine and how it works a little better than we do now. Because if there is any hope at all of ever changing our machine, it can only come through attaining knowledge of it. But again, changing the machine needs to be seen as a very, very distant goal. We can do nothing of the kind right now. All we can do is watch. Watching yourself, observing how your machine works, observing your thoughts, emotional reactions, physical sensations and movements. All of this, if you do it for a long enough time, will convince you of your complete mechanicalness. It will convince you that you are a complete slave to your machine, and that you are totally powerless to control it or to change it in any real or significant way. It will prove to you beyond all doubt that you do not have a permanent and unchanging I. You will find that you are literally asleep and on autopilot for long stretches of your so-called waking life. So, this work, in the beginning, it has nothing to do with trying to change yourself. It is simply about observing yourself, observing your own mechanicalness, finding as much evidence of this mechanicalness as you can, observing all the different ways, big and small, in which you cannot do, and how instead everything just happens. That is what this work is about. That is the core of it, especially in the very beginning. This is bleak and often depressing work. If you think it's not, then you haven't yet fully grasped how hopeless your situation actually is. You know, in many ways, Gurdjieff is almost like the final boss of the black pill. All self-help, all masculinity coaching and everything else, it's all based on the lie that men can do, that it's possible for us to do, but it's not. And this is what you have to understand. This is what, through the work of self-observation, you have to come to realize and to feel deep in your bones. You have to become fully convinced of the fact that self-help and all of this positive mindset bullshit has lied to you. You actually cannot do anything. You cannot make any changes to anything important. And the moment you try, you will immediately come up against a crushing weight of resistance and inertia. And in that moment, you will realize the truth about yourself and about your situation, which is that you cannot do, no matter how hard you try to make yourself, no matter how much you manifest or use affirmations or meditate or try to hypnotize yourself. When it comes to anything that is actually important to you, anything that would bring about a real and lasting positive change in your life, you are completely powerless to affect that outcome. Now, this seems counterintuitive. Like I said, it's an unbelievably bleak philosophy. But what you have to understand is that realizing how hopeless the situation is actually the only way you can begin to find some possible hope of maybe getting out of it. Like Gurdjieff said, when you observe yourself, when you make efforts to change yourself or your habits, and then you closely observe how these efforts go, you will become fully convinced of the fact that you are in a prison and there is no way out. There is no possibility of escape. But the man who knows he's in a prison, the man who is actually conscious enough to have become aware that he's in prison, he has a far better chance of one day escaping from this prison than the man who's also in prison but doesn't even know that he's there. It stands to reason that to escape from a prison, you must first of all realize you're in a prison. And the whole point is that most people don't. People really think they can do. They really think they have a choice. They actually believe this. They think that if push came to shove, they would be able to change their life by a conscious effort. I don't have time to do it now. I'm very busy with work and such, but I could do it if I really wanted to. All of which is delusion. And making real effort to change today, not tomorrow, but actually making an effort now, such as by trying to cold approach a woman every day, for example, this will immediately prove this to you beyond any doubt. So, self-observation is Gurdjieff's first technique, and it's arguably the most important. But to do self-observation, what you actually need to be observing, this can only really be explained by introducing you to Gurdjieff's second technique, and this is what we can call self-struggle. And this means struggling against yourself, struggling against your habits, struggling against all your weaknesses, struggling against your own mechanicalness. Now, self-struggle has two basic components. It can be in denying yourself something you want, or it can be in forcing yourself to do something you do not want to do. Now, for a man who is trying to awaken and become less mechanical, self-observation and self-struggle need to be going on within you at the same time. Because if you just observe yourself without some kind of conscious effort or struggle to change going on inside you, there generally won't be anything worth observing. It's really only when you begin to make an effort to change something in your life, however small, that you can then begin to collect lots of insights and take snapshots of how your machine works during these efforts of conscious will. And so struggle and self-observation are actually not separate techniques at all, but are two sides of the same coin. Any kind of struggle or friction you create in yourself between I want and I don't want, or between I like and I don't like, this is where the work begins, properly speaking. Because it is only now that you will really begin to feel your own mechanicalness, your own slavery, your own inability to change. Now, the nature of this struggle requires special study. First off, one of Gurdjieff's core principles and one of his most useful tips for the work of self-change is that you cannot begin with the biggest thing. If you want to have any hope of changing yourself, which again is virtually impossible, then you must begin with changing small things. To put this into context that everyone watching this video will get, let's talk again about approaching women. Seeing a girl, whether she's alone or with friends, and walking over to her and introducing yourself. You cannot do this. If you could do this and do it consistently whenever you wanted to, then you likely wouldn't even be watching this. And what Gurdjieff says is we cannot begin by trying to change something big like this in ourselves. It's too big for us. It's simply too hard. We are so mechanical. We are so thoroughly enslaved by our own habits, our own inertia, and we are so helpless in the face of external conditions that we simply cannot do a big thing like this. Approaching a girl, for example. And telling a man that he not only can, but should do a big thing like this is just absolutely fantastical. It's like asking a kid who weighs 90 pounds to lift a 200-pound barbell over his head. It's physically impossible. He simply can't do it. And if he actually tries, he could break his neck. So we cannot begin with changing ourselves in big ways. We have to begin with changing small things first. That's the only way you can build a will. You can't build your willpower all at once. You have to build up to it by making small efforts first. When you make these small efforts, it builds your will like a muscle, and then you're able to make slightly bigger efforts the next time. And then, after a great deal of perseverance and struggle to make these efforts, you're eventually able to do the big things. And that's magic. That's how you acquire the ability to do. That's how you become a man in the full sense of the word, with all the qualities that a man rather than a machine has, such as will, a permanent and unchanging eye, immortality, animal magnetism or aura, and a personal intensity that commands people's respect and obedience. But it all begins with doing these small things first, making, or at least trying to make, small changes. Now, there are a number of different things you can do to begin this process, and the different forms that self-struggle and the struggle between yes and no must take depends a great deal on the individual man. This process is intensely personal. It's different for different men. Some men are overweight, for example. In this case, something like fasting could be a useful form of self-struggle and self-observation. But for another man who isn't addicted to food, then fasting might actually be too easy for him to be really useful over the long term. He'll get used to it in a few days, and it will no longer provide enough friction for the fire of self-change to occur. Struggling against the habit of masturbation is useful for all men who have this habit. But again, this is more difficult for some people than it is for others. Some guys can quit masturbation, and after a month or two, the temptations and cravings disappear completely. And while this might be a good thing in some respects, paradoxically, in this work, the ease with which you quit a habit like this can actually be a bad thing, because now that a man has conquered this habit, he must immediately create some new struggle in himself. He must find some other bad habit to eradicate in himself, or think of some new good habit to inculcate in order to have any chance of progressing and developing his powers further. Now, the one habit which Gurdjieff says all men should universally struggle to eradicate in themselves is what he calls expressing unpleasant emotions. This refers to complaining, making negative or critical comments about people, things, or situations. It refers to any expression of any unpleasant emotion whatsoever, whether this is said aloud to other people or simply expressed as a thought in your own mind. Gurdjieff says that struggling against this habit specifically is one of the most important and powerful things we must do if we want to become men. And one reason for this is that what we might call supernatural powers, supernatural abilities, these things depend above all else on a certain power over one's emotions. Emotions are the key to accessing the full range of hidden powers and forces that lie dormant in every man. These things can only ever be unlocked by a certain intensity that precedes in a man's emotional life. They're never unlocked by thinking or by knowledge or by learning. Our real powers can only be unlocked through special work on our emotions. And so struggling against the habit of expressing unpleasant emotions is the most powerful way to train this in the beginning. It's the best place to start this work, along with, as I said, struggling against masturbation and possibly against other habits that are more specific and personal to you. When you have done the work of struggling against small things and overmastering various small habits like these, and only when you have made sustained and successful efforts in this direction for a fairly long period of time, it is only then that you should begin or even can begin to make big changes, to start to struggle against big things. And this is where we get into Gurdjieff's third major technique, which is by far the most important and the granddaddy of them all. And this is something he calls making super efforts, sacrifice, or intentional suffering. As Gurdjieff said, only super efforts count. Now, what he means by this term super effort is extremely important to understand. And this idea, this concept, nested within the framework of everything else I've given you here, this more than anything else is why I'm sitting in a luxury apartment right now. This is why I'm always dressed in designer Italian suits and handmade leather loafers. This is why I enjoy lavish dinners, beautiful girlfriends, and life in the fast lane, despite virtually never having to do any actual work. It's why I get anything and everything I want now. It's because 12 years ago, when I was 21 years old, I learned about this concept of super efforts and I took it very, very seriously. So what is a super effort? I'll quote from Gurdjieff himself here. You must understand that ordinary efforts do not count. Only super efforts count. And so it is always and in everything. Those who do not wish to make super efforts had better give up everything and take care of their health. Can't super efforts be dangerous? Asked someone in the audience who is usually particularly careful about his health. Of course they can. But it is better to die making efforts to awaken than to live in sleep. That's one thing. But for another thing, it is not so easy to die from efforts. We have much more strength than we think, but we never make use of it. What is meant by a super effort? Someone asked. It means an effort beyond the effort that is necessary to achieve a given purpose, said Gurdjieff. Imagine I've been walking all day and I'm very tired. The weather is bad, it's raining and it's cold. In the evening I arrive home. I've walked perhaps 25 miles. In the house, there's dinner. It's warm and pleasant. But instead of sitting down to dinner, I go out into the rain again and decide to walk another 2 miles along the road and then return home. This would be a super effort. While I was going home, it was simply an effort, and this does not count. I was on my way home, the cold, the hunger, the rain, all this made me walk. But in the other case, I walk because I myself decided to do so. So, super efforts. This is where the real action is. This is where all the juice is. If you want to become a man and not a machine, you need to make super efforts, and you need to make them all the time for a very long time. Now, this is where we finally get into domains like approaching women, because for most of us, this is of the order of what Gurdjieff calls a super effort. To see a very attractive woman who you've never met before and to approach her while completely sober without any kind of crutch or outside help, that is a super effort. And that is one of the things I began doing or trying to do very shortly after I discovered this work. Again, in most cases here, you will not succeed in making this effort. Even after enormous, almost superhuman exertions of will, even after struggling against your habits, even after all this, something like cold approaching a woman will usually be too big for you to do. You'll see your mechanicalness in that moment, and you'll see it clearly. You'll see that you really are a machine that has no permanent will, no I, no internal locus of control, no ability to make yourself do what another I previously decided on doing. But there will be other times, rare enough in the beginning, when you actually do manage to approach that girl. And that is where you get the first glimpses of seeing the possibility of finally no longer being completely mechanical. That is when you have finally struggled so intensely and for so long that unlike virtually every other man alive, you actually have something approaching a kind of will. Small and weak and virtually powerless as it may be, you now have a something there where before there was nothing. There is something in you, small and weak as it may be now, which might one day have the power to actually withstand external influences. And this will, this I, this permanent and unchanging self, is the very thing that, if you continue to develop it and strengthen it, can one day give you the possibility to attain immortality, to survive the death of your physical body, and to go on living after death in some form, whether here or in a higher dimension or higher plane of existence, whatever you want to call it. Gurdjieff refers to this as the astral body. He says men are not born with an astral body or a soul or an I, but they have the possibility of developing one. You develop your astral body by developing your will, by forcing yourself to do things, important things, which you do not want to do. And this is directly connected to the idea of animal magnetism. Gurdjieff says animal magnetism is an actual substance. It's made of a type of matter that is invisible and is essentially too subtle or too fine for our senses to perceive. And animal magnetism, this substance, is something a man can only produce in his body by doing this work. The work of self-observation, self-struggle, and above all, making super efforts. Gurdjieff refers to this substance as hand-blood zone. And he says that this substance is essentially equivalent to the blood of the astral body. So again, to recap everything we said, because this is what sexual aura all hinges on. Man is not born with an I, with a will, or with an astral body. These things are very expensive, but he can gradually develop one. He can grow these things in himself by making sustained super efforts in a definite direction. When you make these efforts, you develop and strengthen your astral body and your I, or soul. And it is only when you have an astral body that you then develop powers like magnetism and aura, as well as the ability to survive after the death of your physical body. The reason for this is that Gurdjieff says the astral body is composed of a form of matter that is not material according to what our science at least considers to be material. And what this means is it gives you the ability to withstand and endure anything that is imposed on your physical body externally in the physical world. because there is now something in you that is more than just the physical. And so logically, it is only this which is able to resist the physical. To put it in terms which Gurdjieff himself never would have used, but which are used by the occult society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, you have become and transformed yourself into something more than human. And this alone is what gives you the possibility of surviving after death. This alone is also what gives you the ability to obtain power over your environment in this life and in this world. This is what gives you, finally, the ability to actually do what other men simply imagine they can do. That is to say, this gives you the ability to actually change things in your life, to actually take action, to actually work towards obtaining goals in a straight line and achieve them. It's all dependent on developing a permanent and unchanging I and an astral body, which things are in turn dependent on making super efforts. It all depends on intentional suffering and creating within yourself the struggle between yes and no. Only by creating this artificial struggle within you can you spark the fire needed to fuse all your separate and conflicting small I's into a single permanent I. And this is what gives you an aura. This is what gives you animal magnetism. This is what makes you magnetic and attractive to women wherever you go. And this is the only thing that gives you this aura I'm talking about. A machine cannot have an aura. A machine cannot have magnetism. Because magnetism and an aura are a physical thing that are dependent on certain substances in a man's organism. Substances that can only be produced by a certain kind of work. This is what we call intentional suffering, or the struggle between yes and no, which is work that a machine cannot carry out, by definition. If a man-machine could do this, then he would cease to be a man-machine. He'd be a man, or he'd at least be well on his way to becoming one. Now, when you have this aura, people act like your slaves. There's really no other more polite way of putting this. Doing this work gives you a kind of presence that just instinctively makes people want to do what you say. And people cannot make you react. They cannot exert any influence over your internal state whatsoever, because you are absolutely internally free. You have attained what in ancient times they referred to as liberation. But it's a very different kind of liberation than the kind you get from living in a monastery, because this is a type of liberation that we gain and that can only be gained in life, among other people. And this is what makes the Gurdjieff system different, because it, and it alone among spiritual schools, is able to change the quality of your relations with other people in life, in the world. Not on top of some mountain, not in your bedroom, but in the real world. The only world that actually matters. It makes you a master among people rather than a slave. And when you do this work, after a while, you just become like a fucking brick wall. And nothing and no one can change you or influence you in any way. No one can make you react. No one can make you flinch. You have a degree of self-possession and of unflinching, invincible will that is literally frightening to many people. It gets to the point where, and Gurdjieff talks about this himself, you actually have to act kind of silly to counteract this. You have to play a role and put on a mask of being kind of goofy and self-deprecating. You have to play the fool a bit, because if you don't, the degree of will that you have acquired can actually be so intimidating to people and so almost frightening to them that it can be counterproductive in the situation. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that this work gives you an aura. It gives you a presence that people instinctively feel and that they react to, that they can't help but react to. And you know, unless you're really fucking dumb, it's probably blindingly obvious to you by now that everything I've just described, this is what women want. This is what they're attracted to. This is what they all gravitate to in a man. It's that guy who just has a tangible field around him of commanding personal authority. You just have a certain authority, a certain self-possession, a unity of will that anyone who comes into contact with you can instantly feel. And this is what women are attracted to. This is what gets them wet. This is what makes them want to have sexual intercourse with you right away in many cases. This is what makes them compliant to you, submissive to you, obedient to you, kind and helpful to you. this is what makes them want to submit to you, both in a relationship and the first time you meet them. In short, this is what solves every other problem or issue a man could possibly have in the domain of dating, women, relationships, sexual attraction, and all the rest of it. It's that sense a woman gets from the minute she begins to observe you and how you act, and especially how people act around you, that this man is a master in life. People do what he says. He gets what he wants. Other men move out of his way like they're afraid of him, even if they're bigger than him, even if they're better dressed than him, even if they're older and more established, even if they're more popular and have higher social status in that situation. For some reason, they're all acting like this guy is their fucking boss. And so this is the man I want to mate with. This is the man I want to impregnate me immediately, because this is that killer. This is that mob boss. This is that CEO. You know, she gets the impression that whether you actually have that kind of role in the world yet or not, you probably will at some point. And even if you don't, if she has sons with you, they're going to be like Kangas Khans. They're going to be world leaders and presidents and generals and warlords and tycoons. That's what aura is. That's all that aura is. It comes from self-mastery. All right, so now that you know how to get that sexual aura, that magnetism that just pulls women to you and makes them want you, where do you go from here? I mean, when you're staring down a perfect 10 who's looking you right in the eyes and she's smiling and waiting expectantly to hear what you have to say, what do you say? What do you do? And most importantly, how do you stop this from fizzling out like it always has in the past? How do you stop from boring her? Well, this all boils down to a simple trick that makes any girl chase you into bed. This is a technique I learned from studying a declassified psychological warfare manual put out by the US government. It was called From Psyop to Mind War, The Psychology of Victory. And it was authored by these men, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino and Colonel Paul Vallely. Michael Aquino, as some people may already know, was actually a practicing Satanist. He was a member of the Church of Satan and an avid student of the occult and black magic. And Aquino did something very interesting, and some would say very sinister. He actually took ideas from the occult and from black magic, and he brought them into the world of covert military action, psychological warfare, and propaganda. And what he came up with, this evil genius, was a system for brainwashing people, which he called mind war. This mind control technique was originally developed for the purposes of regime change, propaganda, social control, and other things that the US military has very good reasons to care a lot about. What I discovered, however, is that mind war can also be used to make women addicted to you. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do in the video on the next page. Click the link in the description below and watch my special presentation where I will unveil how to use this covert military-grade mind control technique to make any girl chase you. Now, as I'll show you, this is all accomplished through a sub-technique of mind war, which I call predictive programming. Predictive programming is the ultimate way of controlling a woman's mind over text. This makes it perfect for things like online dating, texting, or even getting back a girl whose number you have, but she went cold and stopped responding. So click the link in the description now and discover 12 magic words you can text a girl that make her obsessed with getting you into bed, even if she's ghosting you right now. This mind control technique has been used to control the outcome of elections, to topple governments, to take over countries, to start revolutions, or to suppress them. It's absolutely fascinating stuff if you're into politics, propaganda, or mass psychology, but it's more fascinating and a lot more useful when you realize that you can use this exact same technique to get bikini models and Instagram baddies naked in your bed. So click the link below and I'll show you exactly how to do that. I'm even going to give you all the word-for-word text that I've used to get these girls so you don't have to do any work. Literally just copy-paste the hypnotic text messages I'll give you and you can start getting 10s in your bed tonight. But one warning, this video will not be up forever. Using mind control to get women into bed is obviously a very controversial topic. And it's even more controversial because these are real mind control techniques, not bullshit, which were actually developed by real people in the US government. So click the link below and watch the video now before someone takes it down and you never get a chance to learn this again.